12 Stoic Lessons to Boost Your Confidence. Stoicism. Lesson 1. Focus only on what you can control. In the bustling port city of Aurelia, there lived a young merchant named Calin. His days were filled with the clamor of dock workers unloading cargo, the chatter of traders haggling over prices, and the sharp scent of salt carried by the sea breeze. Calin had inherited his father's modest trading business, and though he worked tirelessly to expand it, the tides of fortune often seemed to work against him. Storms would delay shipments for weeks, and sometimes entire cargoes were lost to the sea depths. With their ever-changing demands, tax collectors seemed to find new ways to siphon their profits. Competitors spread rumors about his merchandise, driving customers away just as quickly as he gained them. Every evening, Calin returned to his small home overlooking the harbor, staring out at the horizon and wondering if he would ever achieve the stability and success he craved. Despite his efforts, Calin often found himself overcome by anxiety. He lay awake at night, worrying about events far beyond his control. What if a shipment sank tomorrow? What if the governor raised tariffs again? What if a wealthier merchant opened a new shop nearby and stole his customers? The questions swirled endlessly in his mind, leaving him exhausted and restless. As Calin closed his shop one evening, he noticed an elderly man sitting beneath a weathered olive tree in the town square. The man wore a simple tunic and leaned on a staff, watching the world pass by with calm, steady eyes. Something about his presence drew Calin in, and he found himself approaching the stranger. "Good evening," Calin said hesitantly. The old man nodded. "Good evening, young merchant. You seem troubled." Calin hesitated, but the stranger's gentle demeanor encouraged him. "I am troubled. It feels as though the world conspires against me. No matter how hard I work, something always goes wrong." The old man smiled faintly and gestured for Calin to sit beside him. "My name is Theron," he said. "I have seen many years, and in that time I have learned one truth that has granted me peace. Would you care to hear it?" Calin nodded eagerly. Theron leaned closer. "Focus only on what you can control." Calin blinked, unsure if he had misheard. "That's it?" The old man chuckled. "That's it. It may sound simple, but it is far from easy. Let me explain." Theron reached into a satchel and pulled out a small, worn scroll. "This is the work of Epictetus, a philosopher who understood the nature of human suffering. He taught that much of our distress comes not from events, but our judgments about those events." Calin furrowed his brow. "I don't understand." "Consider this," Theron said. "You worry about storms, taxes, and competitors. Can you control the weather? No. Can you dictate the governor's tax policies? No. Can you stop others from opening shops or spreading rumors?" Calin shook his head. "Then why," Theron asked gently, "do you spend your energy worrying about them?" Calin opened his mouth to answer but found no words. Theron continued. "Now, tell me this. Can you improve your trade skills?" "Yes," Calin said. "Can you manage your inventory more carefully?" "I suppose so." "Can you treat your customers well so they return to you instead of your competitors?" "Yes." Theron smiled. "Then that is where your focus should lie. Worrying about what you cannot control is like trying to hold back the tide. It is exhausting and pointless, but improving yourself and your business, those are within your power." Calin left the square that evening, deep in thought. Theron's words lingered in his mind like the fading echoes of a bell. Over the next few days, he sought out copies of Epictetus's teachings, poring over the words and reflecting on their meaning. Slowly, Calin began to change. Each morning, he took time to review his tasks and reminded himself to focus only on what he could control. He studied new trading techniques, learned better ways to store and track his inventory, and spent extra time building relationships with his customers. When storms came and delayed his shipments, he no longer paced his shop in frustration. Instead, he used the time to train his apprentices and repair his equipment. When taxes increased, he adjusted his prices carefully, ensuring his business could still thrive. And when competitors spread rumors, he responded not with anger, but by demonstrating the quality of his goods and service. Months passed, and Calin began to notice a shift, not just in his business but in himself. He no longer felt the constant weight of anxiety pressing down on him. Problems that once seemed overwhelming now appeared manageable. One evening, as Calin closed his shop, he saw Theron sitting under the same olive tree. He approached the old man and smiled. "I took your advice," Kalen said. "I focused only on what I could control. And it's made all the difference." Theron's eyes twinkled. "Good, you have learned the first lesson of peace, my friend. But remember, this is only the beginning." Kalen thanked him and walked away, feeling lighter than he had in years. From that day forward, he faced life's uncertainties not with fear but with resolve, knowing that true freedom lay in mastering his mind. And so, Kalen's business flourished, not because the world had become less chaotic, but because he had learned to focus his efforts where they mattered most. Lesson 2. Embrace discomfort to build resilience. The wind howled through the narrow mountain pass, its icy fingers clawing at the travelers who dared to challenge its path. Among them walked John, his steps deliberate but weary, his cloak flapping violently in the gale. He pressed forward, leaning into the wind, eyes fixed on the dim glow of a fire far in the distance. Beside him trudged another, Era, her face half hidden beneath the folds of her hood. They had journeyed together for weeks, yet spoke little, each burdened by their unspoken struggles. "Another hour, perhaps less," Jan said. Those words were carried away as quickly as they were spoken. Ira didn't respond, her silence a familiar companion. She knew the end of the climb wasn't the end of the trial. What waited for them beyond the pass was uncertain. Cold, hunger, and perhaps failure, but still, they climbed. John had not always been a wanderer of frozen peaks and perilous paths. Once he had been a man of comfort, his days spent in halls warmed by great fires, his nights filled with feasts and laughter. Yet that life had dulled him. When hardship came, as it always does, he had been unprepared. The collapse of his home, the betrayal of those he trusted, and the bitter sting of loss had left him adrift. It was only in his lowest moment, shivering in the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on his back, that he understood. Comfort had made him fragile. It was there in that bleak emptiness that he found the writings of Kalen, the ancient Stoic philosopher. They were carved into the walls of a ruined temple, words that spoke of suffering as a tool, a forge that tempered the soul. Kalen wrote of embracing discomfort, of seeking it out as a means to grow stronger. "Do not flee hardship," Kalen's words had said. "Walk toward it. In pain, you find the truth. In struggle, you find yourself." John had carved those words into his memory, carrying them like a shield against despair. It was that philosophy that had led him to this journey, to seek out the harshest corners of the world and confront them, not for glory but for resilience. The climb steepened and Ira slipped, her foot skidding on loose ice. John caught her arm before she fell. "Careful," he said. She nodded, her breath coming in sharp bursts. "I'm fine." But John saw the doubt flicker in her eyes. She was strong, but strength fades when exhaustion seeps into the bones. He offered no comforting words, for comfort was not what they needed. Instead, he released her arm and stepped aside, letting her continue. He knew that to help her too much would rob her of the chance to endure. Ira, too, was on this journey to prove something to herself, though she had never spoken of what. They were alike in that way, bound not by friendship, but by purpose. Hours passed before they reached the summit, their legs trembling from exertion. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the world drenched in twilight. John pulled out a small tinderbox and struck a spark, coaxing the flame into life. As the fire grew, casting flickering shadows against the snow, Ira sank to the ground and closed her eyes. "We made it," she murmured. "For now," John replied. He fed another branch into the fire. The heat stung at first, their fingers and faces numb from the cold. But it was a welcome sting, a reminder that they could still feel, still endure. Era opened her eyes and stared into the flames. "Why do you do this?" John considered the question. The answer was simple, yet not easy to explain. "To remind myself what I'm capable of," he said at last. "To know that when the world takes everything, I can still stand." She nodded, though her expression remained distant. "I thought the same," she said after a long silence. "I thought if I could survive this, then maybe I'd stop being afraid." John looked at her then, truly looked, and saw what he had missed before. The tightness in her shoulders, the way she flinched at every distant sound. Her battle was not with the mountain, but with something far deeper. "You'll always be afraid," he said gently. "Fear doesn't disappear, but facing it teaches you how to carry it." Ira's eyes met his, and for the first time he saw something other than resolve: acceptance. They slept in shifts, the fire dwindling as the night stretched on. In the morning they rose with aching limbs and frozen fingers, yet neither hesitated to press forward. The storm had passed, but the path ahead was no less treacherous. As they descended the mountain, John found his thoughts returning to Caelan's words. Comfort was an illusion, a fleeting pleasure that bred weakness. Strength came not from ease, but from enduring what others could not. When they reached the valley below, the air was warmer, but neither traveler relaxed. The journey was far from over. "Ready?" John asked. Ira tightened the straps of her pack. "Always." And with that, they walked on, their steps steady, their hearts unyielding. They had embraced discomfort, and in doing so had become something more: resilient, unbreakable, and free. Lesson 3. Practice negative visualization. In the small village of Atherbrook, nestled between the rolling hills and quiet forests, there lived a man named John. He was known for his calm demeanor, unshakable composure, and an inner strength that few could understand. John had not always been this way, and his journey to tranquility had begun many years before. At that time, he had been much like anyone else, easily distracted, often frustrated, and uncertain of how to approach the many challenges life threw his way. But everything changed when he discovered the philosophy of Stoicism. Stoicism, an ancient Greek school of thought, taught that the key to a virtuous and fulfilling life lay not in seeking external pleasures or possessions, but in cultivating inner strength, wisdom, and resilience. John had been introduced to these ideas by an old traveler who passed through Atherbrook one fateful autumn evening. The traveler, whose name was Alaron, had spoken of the importance of self-mastery and living by nature. "It is not the external world that disturbs us," Alaron had explained, "but our judgments about it." John was captivated by Alaron's words. Over time, he began to adopt the principles of Stoicism into his daily life, and soon he became aware of a profound shift within himself. He no longer let external events dictate his emotions. He no longer feared failure or lamented loss. Instead, he focused on what was within his control: his thoughts, actions, and responses. One Stoic practice that particularly resonated with John was negative visualization. This concept, introduced by the Stoic philosopher Seneca, involves deliberately imagining the worst-case scenario to appreciate what one currently has and to prepare oneself for the inevitable loss. The idea is that by contemplating the possibility of losing everything, the things we hold most dear, we can better understand the fleeting nature of life and find peace with it. It was on a quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, that John began to practice negative visualization in earnest. He sat by the window of his modest home, looking out over the village he had come to love. The village, with its cobblestone streets and simple, humble cottages, had become his sanctuary. He thought of his family, the kind, warm-hearted people who shared his life. He thought of his work, his modest trade as a carpenter, which brought him a sense of purpose and satisfaction. In his mind, he began to imagine the worst possible scenario. He imagined losing his family, watching them slip away through death or separation. He saw his home crumbling into dust, his tools rusting, his trade forgotten. He imagined being cast out into the world, with nothing to his name, wandering through the streets of distant cities, alone and helpless. As he allowed himself to fully experience the weight of these thoughts, John felt a deep sense of sadness, but he also felt a strange sense of relief. He understood that, while these were painful imaginings, they were not the reality of his present life. His family was healthy, his home was intact, and his work brought him fulfillment. These things were not guaranteed, but they were his to enjoy for now. He had come to realize that by contemplating their loss, he was more able to appreciate their presence. In the weeks that followed, John continued to practice negative visualization. He would spend time each day reflecting on the impermanence of life, imagining what might be lost, and then refocusing on what he had in the present moment. Each time he did this, he felt a deeper sense of gratitude for the people and experiences in his life. He also felt more at peace with the knowledge that one day, these things would be taken from him. As John practiced, he began to notice a shift, not only within himself but also in the way he interacted with the world. He found that he was less anxious about the future and less attached to material things. He stopped worrying about the small inconveniences that once consumed him, such as a minor injury or a misstep at work. He realized that even in the face of adversity, he could remain calm, composed, and strong. He had developed a resilience that allowed him to weather life's storms without being shaken. One winter's evening, as John sat by the hearth with his wife Alina and their young daughter Sira, he felt a deep sense of peace. The fire crackled and popped as the warmth spread throughout the room. His family was gathered close, their laughter filling the air, and the room was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread. In that moment, he allowed himself to fully appreciate everything he had: his family, his home, his work, and the peace he had cultivated through years of Stoic practice. As he gazed at his loved ones, he thought back to the dark days of his past when he had been full of fear and doubt. He thought of how he had once been afraid to lose the things he held most dear. But now, he knew that it was not the fear of loss that mattered, but the way he chose to live in the present moment. He turned to Alina, his voice soft but resolute. "I am grateful for everything we have. I know that nothing in this life is permanent, and one day we will have to part with it all. But for now, I am content. I am at peace with whatever comes." Alina smiled and nodded, understanding the depth of his words. She had watched her husband transform over the years, and she too had come to embrace the principles of Stoicism in her own life. Together, they had built a life grounded in acceptance, resilience, and gratitude. Sira, ever curious, looked up at her father and asked, "What will happen when we lose everything, Papa?" John smiled gently, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "When we lose everything, my dear, we will remember that we have lived well, and we will be grateful for the time we had. That is all we can ask for." As Sira pondered his words, John felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had come to understand that the key to a fulfilling life was not in clinging to the things he loved, but in accepting their impermanence with grace. Through the practice of negative visualization, he learned to embrace the fleeting nature of existence and find peace in the present moment. And so, John lived the rest of his days in Overbrook, with a heart full of gratitude, a mind steady and clear, and a soul at peace with the inevitable flow of life. He had learned that true strength came not from avoiding loss or hardship, but from accepting them with the wisdom of the Stoics, knowing that all things, both good and bad, would pass in their own time. John's story of transformation was one that inspired many in Atherbrook, and it soon became known throughout the village as a testament to the power of Stoicism and the practice of negative visualization. His legacy lived on in the hearts of those who had heard his story and in the quiet moments of reflection they shared. Lesson 4. Live by virtue, not opinion. Once in a distant, forgotten land, there lived two wise individuals, each possessing unique wisdom, yet neither truly understood the deeper nature of virtue. One was known as John, a Stoic philosopher who believed in the strength of rational thought and the importance of inner control. The other, a spirited young woman named Amara, was a seeker of truth and meaning, constantly grappling with the conflicting voices of society. They were strangers in their own lives, guided by the ever-changing tides of public opinion, struggling to find inner peace amidst the chaos around them. John and Amara met one fateful day by a quiet river, where the waters seemed to mirror the turmoil that lay within their hearts. It was there that they first discussed the nature of virtue, unaware that their lives were about to be transformed forever. "John," Amara began, her voice heavy with the weight of the world, "tell me, how do you find peace when everyone around you seems to hold a different opinion about what is right or wrong? How do you stay grounded in a world that changes its values with each passing day?" John, always calm and composed, thought for a moment before responding. "I have learned, Amara, that true peace comes not from the approval or disapproval of others, but from within. Our world is constantly shifting, and the opinions of those around us are like the wind, changing direction with every breath. To live by their standards is to be tossed about like a leaf in a storm." Amara looked at him, skeptical. "But surely we cannot live in isolation. Don't we need the approval of others to survive? If we do not follow the norms of society, how can we thrive?" John's gaze grew steady, his voice filled with the wisdom of ages. There is a difference between survival and true living. To survive is to follow the opinions of others, to chase after fleeting desires and external validation. But to truly live, we must live by virtue, that which is constant and unchanging, regardless of what others may think or say. Amara paused, contemplating his words. "But what does it mean to live by virtue?" she asked. "What is virtue, and how do we recognize it when the world around us is so filled with confusion?" John smiled, a faint glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "Virtue is not something that can be dictated by others. It is a personal compass shaped by reason and wisdom. In the teachings of Stoicism, we learn that our lives are guided by 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. These virtues are not influenced by the whims of society. They are universal truths, unchanging and eternal." Amara's eyes lit up as she began to understand. "So you are saying that if we live by these virtues, we can find inner peace and freedom, no matter what the world around us believes?" "Exactly," John replied. "To live by virtue is to embrace the power of your mind, to seek truth above all else, and to act by reason. When we allow ourselves to be swayed by external opinions, we relinquish our sovereignty. But when we live by virtue, we reclaim our inner strength and live in alignment with our true nature." Amara's heart stirred with a sense of clarity she had never felt before. She had spent her life searching for answers in the opinions of others, but now she saw that the true answer lay within herself. She thanked John for his wisdom and vowed to no longer be enslaved by the fleeting opinions of society. As the days passed, Amara began to change. She no longer sought validation from the crowd or chased after the latest trends. Instead, she turned inward, dedicating herself to the pursuit of wisdom and virtue. She studied the teachings of ancient philosophers, reading the works of the Stoics, Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. She practiced the art of temperance, learning to control her desires and impulses. She cultivated courage in the face of adversity, and she strove for justice in her interactions with others. Over time, Amara's life began to transform. No longer caught in the grip of social expectations, she found a deep sense of fulfillment and peace. She began to understand that living by virtue was not about avoiding the world, but about engaging with it in a way that was true to her nature. One day, as Amara stood on the same riverbank where she had first met John, she encountered a new person, a man named Jalen, who was lost in the chaos of the world. He too was struggling with the constant pull of societal opinions, unsure of who he truly was. Amara, now a beacon of wisdom and inner peace, smiled warmly at him. "Jalen, I know the path you are on," she said. "I once sought the approval of others, but now I have learned the power of living by virtue, not opinion. It is the only way to find true peace." Jalen looked at her, his eyes filled with confusion. "But how can I know what is virtuous when everyone around me says something different?" Amara gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "The answers are within you, Jalen. Virtue is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of recognizing what is true, just, and right in your heart. When you live by these principles, you will find your way, no matter the opinions of others." And so the cycle continued. The lesson of living by virtue, not opinion, was passed from one person to another, like a flame that never went out. John, Amara, and Jalen each walked their path, guided by the unwavering light of virtue, and in doing so, they found peace that transcended the ever-changing tides of the world around them. As they each continued their journey, they discovered that true freedom is not found in the approval of others, but in the strength to live by one's own values. In a world filled with noise and confusion, the quiet voice of virtue remains steadfast, guiding those who choose to listen. And in this way, they learn to live not for the opinions of the world, but for the virtues that reside within their own hearts. Thus, the story of John, Amara, and Jalen serves as a timeless reminder. A reminder that in a world of ever-changing opinions, the only true guide is the unwavering path of virtue. Lesson 5. View obstacles as opportunities. In a secluded village nestled in the valleys of an ancient mountain range, there lived 2 close friends named John and Theros. They had spent their entire lives together, from childhood days filled with laughter and play to the quiet, reflective adulthood they now shared. The village was small, its people humble, yet it was rich in wisdom passed down through generations. This wisdom often arrived in the form of simple, daily lessons that shaped people's lives and perspectives. John and Theros were especially fond of one lesson they had learned many years ago. It had become a central guiding principle in their lives: view obstacles as opportunities. It had not been an easy lesson for them to internalize, for they both had faced significant hardships that seemed at times insurmountable. Yet, despite the challenges that had come their way, they held fast to this philosophy, seeking to embrace adversity rather than avoid it. One autumn morning, as they sat by a small fire near the edge of the village, Jan spoke with a thoughtful expression on his face. "Theros," he began, his voice steady but contemplative, "I've been thinking a lot about how we react to difficulties. It's easy to become frustrated, to feel as though the universe is conspiring against us when things don't go our way. But there's something deeper here. Something that I believe is part of the natural order of things." Theros, a man whose wisdom was often sought by others, nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the flames. "Yes, John," Theros replied, his voice calm. "I know what you mean. For many years, I too found myself in a similar state of frustration, struggling against the world as if it were my enemy. But then I began to read and reflect on the teachings of the ancient Stoics. I came across the writings of Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca. They spoke of things that changed my perspective entirely." John raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You see," Theros continued, "the Stoics taught that life is filled with obstacles, and we have no control over most of them. What we do have control over, however, is how we respond. They believed that the only thing truly within our power is our reaction to circumstances. An obstacle, then, is not something to fear or resist, but an opportunity to practice virtue." John looked at his friend, his mind racing with thoughts. He had heard bits of Stoic philosophy in passing before, but it had never struck him with such force. "Opportunity?" John asked, his tone both curious and skeptical. "How can an obstacle be an opportunity? When life throws hardship at us, it often feels like an insurmountable wall, something that only brings pain and frustration." Theros smiled, a knowing smile, as if he had anticipated this question. "That's the challenge, isn't it?" Theros said. "We often perceive obstacles as barriers that prevent us from achieving our desires. But what if, instead of seeing them as hindrances, we saw them as chances to grow, to develop patience, resilience, and strength? For instance, consider the last time you faced difficulty. Did you not grow from it, even if only a little? Did you not become wiser, even if the lesson was painful?" John sat back, absorbing the words. It was true. The most significant moments of his life, the ones that had shaped him into the person he is today, had come during times of difficulty. When he had faced illness, the loss of a loved one, or financial ruin, it had been during these moments that he had learned the most about himself and the world around him. But it wasn't just about enduring hardship. It was about transforming it into something valuable. "I see now," John said softly. "Obstacles are not the enemy. They are a part of life's flow, like a river that occasionally changes course. When we try to resist, we only fight against nature. But when we accept and adapt, we find new paths, new ways of being." Theros nodded. "Exactly. The Stoics teach that the key to living a virtuous life is to cultivate the ability to control one's reactions to things outside of our control. We cannot always change the external circumstances, but we can change how we perceive and respond to them. When we embrace challenges, we unlock our potential and strengthen our character." John's mind turned over the idea, and the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Life was not about avoiding discomfort or seeking ease. It was about meeting difficulties head-on and finding meaning in them. This was the essence of Stoicism: to live in harmony with nature, to focus on what one can control, and to cultivate inner peace regardless of external conditions. Later that afternoon, Jan decided to put this new understanding into practice. The next day, an unexpected storm swept through the village, causing damage to several homes and fields. People were frantic, but John remained calm. He saw the storm as an obstacle, certainly, but one that he could use to contribute positively to the community. Instead of focusing on the destruction, he helped his neighbors rebuild, using his strength and creativity to restore what had been lost. The storm became an opportunity to connect with others, to strengthen the bonds of their shared humanity. Theros watched John as he worked, and a sense of pride swelled within him. He knew that his friend had truly grasped the lesson, that obstacles, when viewed with the right perspective, were not to be feared but embraced as opportunities to grow and become stronger. In time, John and Theros came to understand that life was not a straight path, but a winding journey. The obstacles they faced were not just random misfortunes, but stepping stones on their personal growth. Every difficulty was an invitation to learn, to practice patience, and to refine their character. One winter, as they sat by a roaring fire, John turned to Theros with a smile. "Do you remember," John said, "how we used to fear the challenges of life? How we would shake our fists at the heavens when things didn't go our way?" Theros laughed softly. "Yes, I remember. But now we know better. We know that every challenge is an opportunity to build strength, to live according to our values, and to contribute meaningfully to the world." John nodded, his face serene. "Indeed," he said, "obstacles are the forge in which our true selves are shaped." And so, as the years passed, the two friends continued to live by the lesson they had learned together. To view obstacles not as enemies to be defeated, but as opportunities to embrace, grow from, and ultimately become the best versions of themselves. For John and Theros, this philosophy became more than just a lesson. It became the very foundation upon which they built their lives. This expanded version integrates Stoic principles of resilience, growth, and virtue, illustrating how obstacles can be seen not as burdens, but as essential opportunities for personal development. Lesson 6. The art of practicing gratitude. In the heart of a bustling city filled with the constant hum of daily life, two friends, John and Zena, found themselves at a crossroads. Their paths had diverged in many ways, but one thing they both shared was an innate sense of discontent that seemed to grow stronger each day. No matter how much they accomplished or how many goals they achieved, something deep inside them felt missing, an emptiness that no external success could fill. John was a philosopher by nature, always searching for meaning in every situation. He spent his days studying ancient texts, particularly the writings of the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca. To him, Stoicism offered a path to true freedom. It emphasized the power of self-discipline, accepting things outside one's control, and cultivating inner peace. Yet, despite his intellectual grasp of Stoic principles, John was still struggling with a nagging feeling of dissatisfaction. Zena, on the other hand, had always been a free spirit. She loved the idea of seeking joy in the little things, like the warmth of the sun on her face or the sound of rain tapping against the window. However, over time, even these simple pleasures had lost their spark. She had fallen into a routine, becoming frustrated when things didn't go as planned. It seemed that no matter how much she tried to stay present, her mind always wandered to what she didn't have, what she had yet to achieve. One winter afternoon, as the cold wind whipped through the trees and the last remnants of autumn clung to the branches, John and Zena met for their weekly walk through the park. As they strolled, their conversation turned toward the ongoing struggle in their lives. John spoke first, his voice tinged with frustration. "I've been thinking a lot about Stoicism lately, Zena," he said. "The Stoics teach that we cannot control what happens to us, only how we respond. But despite all that I know, I can't shake this feeling that something is missing. I keep striving for more, but it feels like I'm running on a treadmill that never stops." Zena nodded, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I get that. I've been feeling the same way. I keep hoping that one day I'll find that one thing that will make everything feel right. But nothing seems to stick. I've been reading a lot about gratitude too, how it's supposed to change the way we see things. But even that feels like an empty promise." John paused, his brow furrowed in thought. "You know, Zena, maybe we're both looking at this the wrong way. Gratitude isn't just about feeling thankful when things go well. It's about acknowledging what we already have and shifting our perspective. Perhaps the Stoics had a point when they said that our minds are the only things truly within our control. Perhaps it's not about adding more to our lives, but about appreciating what we have." Zena looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. But how can we truly be grateful when everything around us feels so out of reach? John smiled faintly, adjusting the scarf around his neck. It's not about the things around us, Zena. It's about our ability to control our reactions. Take Marcus Aurelius, for example. He ruled an empire, but he understood that his true wealth came from his ability to be at peace with the world, regardless of what happened. He didn't wait for circumstances to change to practice gratitude. He did it amid hardship. Zena thought about this for a moment. So you're saying that gratitude is a mindset? Exactly, John replied. And that mindset doesn't depend on what we lack. Instead, it depends on recognizing what we already possess, the things that make our lives meaningful, even in the smallest moments. The Stoics practiced gratitude not because they were naive or blind to the hardships of life, but because they understood that gratitude is a powerful tool for mental clarity and inner peace. Zena's eyes softened as she absorbed his words. She had always admired John's ability to find wisdom in the most unexpected places. But this was different. This wasn't about mere intellectual understanding. It was about living with intention, about choosing to be grateful in the face of uncertainty and discomfort. Over the following weeks, John and Zena began their practice of gratitude in earnest. Every morning, before the world had fully awoken, they would sit quietly in the park and reflect on the things they were thankful for. They started small, appreciating the warmth of their morning coffee, the gentle glow of the sunrise, and the sound of birds chirping in the distance. These simple acts of gratitude helped them reconnect with the present moment, even when the weight of the world seemed heavy on their shoulders. As they practiced more consistently, they noticed subtle changes within themselves. John began to feel a deeper sense of peace, no longer overwhelmed by the need to control every aspect of his life. He realized that his greatest power lay not in his accomplishments, but in his ability to choose how he responded to life's challenges. Gratitude became his anchor, a steady reminder that even in the most difficult times, there was always something to be thankful for. Zena, too, experienced a shift. She no longer felt as though happiness was something to be attained in the future. Instead, she found joy in the present moment, in the small, fleeting experiences that had once seemed insignificant. She discovered that gratitude wasn't just about looking for silver linings. It was about accepting life as it was, imperfections and all. One evening, as they sat by the fire, their conversation turned once again to Stoicism and the lessons they had learned over the past few months. You know, Zena said thoughtfully, I've been thinking about what you said, the part about how the Stoics believed that we control our reactions. I think it's true. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond. And practicing gratitude? It's like a muscle. The more we do it, the stronger it becomes. John nodded, his expression serene. That's right. The Stoics didn't see gratitude as a passive emotion, but as an active choice. It's not about waiting for the world to give us reasons to be thankful. It's about choosing to see the good in the world, even when it's hard to do so. And the more we do that, the more we begin to cultivate a mindset of resilience and inner peace. As the fire crackled, John and Zena sat in comfortable silence, each reflecting on the lessons they had learned. Gratitude had become more than just a practice. It had become a way of life. And in embracing it, they had found a sense of peace that transcended external circumstances, a peace that came from within. In the end, they realized that the key to a fulfilling life wasn't in constantly striving for more, but in appreciating what they already had. By cultivating gratitude, they unlocked a deeper sense of contentment, one that allowed them to face life's challenges with clarity and grace. And in doing so, they had discovered the true power of Stoicism, the ability to live in harmony with the world, regardless of what it may bring. This expanded version adds philosophical reflections, personal growth, and a deeper connection to Stoic principles, making gratitude a more integral part of the characters' journeys. Lesson 7. Detach from outcomes. Once upon a time, in a faraway land, lived two individuals who were remarkably similar in their outward appearances, yet vastly different in their inner worlds. One was named John, a thoughtful and curious soul, and the other, Alara, a calm and contemplative thinker. They had been friends for as long as they could remember, and through their shared experiences, they learned a great deal from one another. John was a passionate and ambitious man, always driven to reach his goals and prove himself. His life was filled with dreams of success, wealth, and recognition. He believed that if he worked hard enough, the universe would reward him with everything he ever wanted. He spent his days planning, striving, and hoping, often feeling frustrated and disheartened when things did not go as he expected. Alara, on the other hand, had a completely different approach to life. While she also had dreams and aspirations, she did not let herself become overly attached to any specific outcome. She believed in the power of focusing on the process itself, rather than the rewards it might bring. Her life was guided by the principles of Stoicism, a philosophy that emphasized resilience, acceptance, and self-control. One evening, as the two friends sat by a serene river, watching the golden sunset, John spoke about his latest ambition. "I've been working on this business idea for months, Alara," John said, his eyes shining with excitement. "I've poured my heart and soul into it. I just know it's going to be a success. The only thing that stands in my way now is finding investors who believe in me." Alara smiled gently and looked out at the river, where the water flowed steadily, unaffected by the world around it. "I admire your dedication, John. But let me ask you this. What happens if things don't go according to plan? If the investors don't come through, or if your business fails?" John's smile faltered, his confidence wavering. I don't know. I suppose I'll be devastated. All my hard work will have been for nothing." Alara nodded thoughtfully. "But you see, John, that is where we differ. You are attaching your happiness and sense of worth to the outcome. You are tying your identity to a specific result. Stoicism teaches us that we should focus on what is within our control, the actions we take, the effort we put in, and the choices we make. The outcome is never certain, and sometimes, no matter how hard we try, things will not unfold as we hope." John looked puzzled. "So you're saying I shouldn't care whether I succeed or not?" "Not exactly," Alara explained. "What I'm saying is that success and failure are not the ultimate measures of our lives. It's the way we approach life that matters. If you can detach yourself from the need for a specific outcome, you'll find peace in the process itself. Whether you succeed or fail, you will know that you gave your best, and that is enough." John felt a wave of realization wash over him. He had always thought that his worth was tied to what he achieved, but Alara's words opened a new door in his mind. Could it be that the key to true happiness was not in attaining external success, but in embracing the journey and accepting whatever came his way? As the days passed, John began to reflect more on Alara's teachings. He still worked hard, but he did so with a new perspective. He focused on the quality of his efforts, rather than obsessing over the results. He learned to embrace uncertainty and let go of his attachment to specific outcomes. Even when things didn't go as planned, he found himself at peace, knowing he had done his best. Alara, too, continued to live her life in harmony with her Stoic principles. She practiced mindfulness and embraced each moment, free from the need to control every aspect of her future. She knew that the world was unpredictable and that she could only control her actions and responses. 1 year later, John's business had not turned out the way he had originally envisioned. The investors he had hoped for never materialized, and many of the challenges he faced seemed insurmountable. But instead of feeling defeated, he took pride in the lessons he had learned and the resilience he had built. He found joy in the growth he had experienced, even if it hadn't led to the outcome he had once dreamed of. One evening, he and Alara sat by the river once more, as they had done so many times before. "You were right," John said, his voice filled with gratitude. "At first I thought I was failing, but now I see that I was only failing to see the bigger picture. It wasn't about the outcome. It was about the journey, the lessons, and the person I became along the way." Alara smiled, her eyes reflecting the stillness of the river. "Exactly, John. The Stoic way is not about chasing a particular result, but about embracing whatever comes your way with grace and wisdom. Life will always be unpredictable, but we can always choose how to respond." John felt a sense of peace settle within him, a peace that he had never known before. He had learned to detach from outcomes and focus on what truly mattered: his efforts, his growth, and his inner tranquility. And with that newfound understanding, he was ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that he had the power to navigate it with grace. The Stoic teachings, as Alara had shared, Stoicism is an ancient philosophy that teaches us to focus on what is within our control. It emphasizes the importance of resilience, acceptance, and inner peace, regardless of external circumstances. By practicing Stoicism, we can free ourselves from the grip of attachment to outcomes, which often leads to disappointment and frustration. In the modern world, it's easy to become fixated on success, wealth, or recognition. However, true contentment comes from embracing life as it is, accepting both its highs and lows, and understanding that our worth is not determined by external achievements, but by our inner strength and ability to navigate the challenges we face. As John and Alara discovered, the path to peace lies not in controlling every aspect of life, but in cultivating an attitude of acceptance and gratitude. By letting go of our attachment to outcomes, we can find freedom in the present moment and experience a deep sense of fulfillment, no matter what the future holds. Let me know if you'd like any further adjustments or additions. Lesson 8: Developing Self-Discipline Through Stoicism. Once in a distant town nestled between serene mountains and vast plains, there lived two men named John and Eldrick. Though their names were different, their paths in life were deeply intertwined. Both were seeking the same thing: wisdom, self-control, and the power to master their emotions. Their journey of self-discovery was rooted in the philosophy of Stoicism, an ancient way of life that teaches the pursuit of virtue, wisdom, and resilience. John, a man of quiet strength, had spent most of his life building physical discipline. His muscles were strong, his body resilient, and his mind constantly honed to push through any difficulty. Yet despite his robust exterior, he felt something was missing inside him. It was not enough to merely conquer the world outside. He longed to tame the wild storm that raged within him. The emotions, the doubts, and the distractions often pulled him away from his true purpose. Eldrick, on the other hand, was a man who had been lost for many years. His life was ruled by whims and impulses, his mind a maze of disorganized thoughts. Despite his best efforts to gain control, he found himself constantly swayed by the world around him, never able to stay focused on what truly mattered. Eldrick had heard of Stoicism before, but it was only when he crossed paths with John that he began to fully understand its principles. One day, while walking along the riverbank, John and Eldrick spoke of their struggles, their desires, and their visions for the future. The conversation turned to the teachings of the Stoics, philosophers who had lived centuries ago, but whose wisdom still rang true in the hearts of those seeking clarity and strength. Stoicism, John began, teaches us that our lives are shaped by the events that happen to us, but not in the way we think. The external world is often beyond our control, but we always have control over how we respond to it. Emotions are like the weather. They come and go, but we don't have to let them dictate our actions. Eldrick, who had been listening intently, nodded slowly. But how do we stay disciplined in the face of so many distractions? How do we quiet the noise that constantly pulls us in different directions? John smiled. Discipline starts with understanding that we are not our emotions or our impulses. We are the ones who decide what we focus on, what we value, and how we respond. It's about creating space between what happens and how we react. This is the essence of Stoicism, focusing only on what is within our control and letting go of what isn't. Eldrick was intrigued, but still unsure. But isn't that easier said than done? I feel like I'm always battling myself trying to control the chaos inside. That's the point, John said gently. Stoicism doesn't promise an easy path, but it offers a way to cultivate inner peace. It teaches us that our greatest battle is not with the world outside, but with the thoughts and emotions within. Self-discipline is about becoming aware of those thoughts and choosing to act in alignment with our values, not our impulses. As they walked deeper into the woods, John shared his personal experience with Stoicism. He spoke of the ancient Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, who had once written, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Explained how this teaching had transformed his own life. He had learned to control his desires, to focus on his actions, and to take responsibility for his thoughts. It wasn't about repressing emotions or denying them. It was about learning to recognize them without letting them control him. Eldrick listened intently, feeling a flicker of hope. Perhaps, he thought, there was a way to tame the storm within. Perhaps, through discipline, he could build a life of purpose and meaning. That evening, they sat by a crackling fire, the flames casting shadows on their faces. John continued to speak of the Stoic practice of mindfulness, of taking time each day to reflect on one's thoughts, actions, and emotions. Discipline, he explained, is not something that happens overnight. It's a daily practice, a series of small decisions made with intention. Every moment is an opportunity to choose how we respond, to choose what we focus on. Eldrick felt a surge of inspiration. I've been so caught up in the external world, in seeking validation and avoiding discomfort, that I've neglected the power I have within myself. I see now that self-discipline isn't about controlling everything around me, but about mastering my responses. The two men spent the next few weeks together, each day practicing the teachings of Stoicism. They learned to observe their thoughts without judgment, to detach from their emotions, and to take responsibility for their actions. Slowly but surely, Eldrick began to feel a shift within him. The constant turmoil in his mind began to settle, and he felt a newfound sense of clarity and purpose. One morning, as they sat by the river once again, Eldrick turned to John with gratitude. I feel like a different person. My mind is clearer, and I'm more focused than ever before. Stoicism has shown me that true discipline comes not from force, but from understanding and choice. John nodded, his eyes filled with quiet wisdom. Discipline is the foundation of a virtuous life. It allows us to act with integrity, to pursue our highest values, and to live in harmony with ourselves and the world around us. But remember, it is a lifelong journey. We will never be perfect, but each day is a new opportunity to grow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its golden light across the river, the two men sat in peaceful silence, knowing that their journey towards self-discipline had only just begun. They had learned that true freedom comes not from external circumstances, but from the mastery of one's mind and actions. And so, John and Eldrick continued to walk the path of Stoicism, knowing that as long as they stayed true to their inner wisdom, they would never lose their way. In this story, John and Eldrick's journey reflects the process of mastering self-discipline through the teachings of Stoicism. By focusing on their internal responses and making intentional decisions, they learn that true discipline is not about controlling external factors, but cultivating inner strength and wisdom. Lesson 9. Keep death in mind. Memento mori. In the bustling city of Astraea, under the golden sky that gently faded to shades of crimson each evening, lived a man named Jonian. He was known throughout the city not for wealth, not for grandeur, but for his calm and introspective nature. Many marveled at how he carried himself through life with such grace, never hurried, never anxious, but always present in the moment. Jonian had spent much of his life studying ancient texts, particularly the teachings of Stoicism. He believed in the power of controlling one's emotions, understanding the impermanence of life, and above all, accepting death as an inseparable part of existence. For Jonian, the idea of memento mori, the reminder of death, was not something morbid or depressing. Rather, it was a guiding principle that shaped his days and informed his actions. He had a friend named Lyra who was much younger than him, full of ambition and dreams. Lyra was constantly racing against time, striving to accumulate achievements and prove herself to the world. She admired Jonian for his serenity, but she couldn't quite understand how he could live without the urgency that seemed to drive her existence. One afternoon, as the sun began its descent and the air turned cooler, Lyra found herself sitting across from Jonian at their favorite cafe. The streets of Astraea buzzed with life, but their little corner was peaceful, with the soft murmur of distant conversations and the clink of cups and plates. "I've been thinking," Lyra began, her voice laced with frustration. "I know you believe in memento mori, but sometimes it feels like you're using it as an excuse to not act. You've achieved so much in your life, but you don't seem to want more. You don't seem to care about your legacy, your impact on the world." Jonian looked at her for a long moment, his wise eyes reflecting the weight of years spent contemplating the nature of existence. He took a deep breath, his fingers lightly tapping the edge of his coffee cup as he collected his thoughts. "Lyra," he said softly, "you misunderstand the point. It's not that I don't care about living fully or about leaving a legacy. It's that I've come to understand that my time is finite. Every moment is a gift, not to be wasted on meaningless pursuits, but to be cherished and spent wisely." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "But how do you reconcile that with not striving for more? You seem content with little. You don't seek power, fame, or even wealth. Isn't there more to life than just living in the present?" Jonian smiled, a gentle and knowing smile. He had long since made peace with the fact that his philosophy might be misunderstood by those who were still chasing the fleeting pleasures of the world. True happiness, Lyra, doesn't come from chasing what is outside of us. It's born from within. The Stoics teach us that the only thing we can truly control is how we respond to the world. External circumstances will come and go. Wealth will rise and fall, fame will fade, and power will slip through your fingers. But how we choose to live in the face of all that is what defines us. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Lyra's eyes softened, though she still seemed unconvinced. "And as for death," Jonian continued, "the Stoics remind us that death is not something to fear or avoid, but something to accept. Every day that we wake up is one day closer to our end. But rather than making us anxious, this knowledge should free us. It allows us to live with purpose, to focus on what truly matters, and to release the trivial concerns that so many of us cling to." Lyra sat back in her chair, her thoughts swirling like the leaves caught in the wind outside. She had always been taught that death was something to fight against, to avoid at all costs. But here, in the quiet presence of her friend, she began to wonder if perhaps Jonian had discovered a deeper truth. "I've been so focused on the future," she confessed, her voice quieter now, "on what I can achieve, on what I can leave behind. But it's exhausting, Jonian. I feel like I'm constantly chasing something, and I'm not sure what it is anymore." Jonian nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "The future will always be just out of reach, Lyra. If you live only for what is to come, you will miss the beauty of the present moment. And if you live only in fear of death, you will never truly live." As the evening drew on and the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Lyra sat in silence, contemplating the wisdom her friend had shared. She had never thought about life this way, about living under the inevitability of death, about finding peace not in external success, but in internal tranquility. It was at that moment that Lyra made a decision. She would change the way she viewed the world. She would focus not on the fleeting achievements, but on the present, on the relationships, the quiet moments, the simple joys. She would remember that death was not an enemy, but a reminder to live fully, to embrace each moment as a gift. Jonian, in turn, was content. He knew that his role was not to convince others to adopt his philosophy, but to live by it and let it speak for itself. Through his actions, his peace, and his acceptance of the inevitable, he hoped others might find their path to clarity. As Lyra stood to leave, she looked at Jonian with newfound understanding. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady and filled with gratitude, "for reminding me that death is not something to fear, but something to teach us how to live." Jonian gave a small nod, his heart warmed by her words. "Remember, Lyra," he said gently, "it's not about living forever, it's about living well." And with that, Lyra left, carrying with her a new sense of peace and purpose. As she walked down the cobbled streets of Astraea, she allowed herself to fully embrace the present, knowing that death was not a dark cloud looming overhead, but a companion that would help her live a life worth living. Lesson 10. Cultivate inner calm. John and Lyra had always been known for their patience and wisdom, even in the face of adversity. They lived in a small village, nestled between towering mountains, where the seasons changed slowly, and nature seemed to whisper the lessons of life to those who listened carefully. Despite their peaceful surroundings, however, John and Lyra were not born with their sense of inner calm. It had been cultivated over years of reflection, struggle, and personal growth. John had once been impulsive and reactive. He had a temper that flared up at the smallest provocation. His impatience led him into countless conflicts, often causing him regret and sorrow. As a young man, he had been prone to loud arguments and rash decisions, never fully considering the consequences of his actions. But the teachings of Stoicism, which he had encountered during a period of deep personal turmoil, slowly began to reshape his understanding of life. Stoicism, as John learned, was not about suppressing one's emotions, but rather about transforming one's relationship with them. It was about accepting that there were things beyond one's control and finding peace in the face of adversity. He discovered that the key to inner calm was not avoiding challenges, but facing them with a sense of detached wisdom, understanding that they were part of the natural ebb and flow of life. Lyra, on the other hand, had always been more reserved. She was the daughter of a well-respected philosopher who had spent many years studying the ancient wisdom of various schools of thought, including Stoicism. Lyra had grown up listening to her father's quiet musings about the importance of virtue, wisdom, and self-control. While her childhood had been peaceful, it had also been marked by moments of intense struggle, particularly when her father passed away unexpectedly. Her father's death left a hole in Lyra's heart that seemed impossible to fill. For a long time, she grappled with feelings of grief and loss, unsure how to move forward. But she turned to the teachings of Stoicism to help her navigate her pain. She came to realize that while she could not control the events that had caused her suffering, she could control how she responded to them. Stoicism taught her to embrace the impermanence of life, to acknowledge that all things, both joyful and sorrowful, were fleeting. This understanding helped her accept her grief, rather than fight against it. One afternoon, as they sat together beneath a vast oak tree, John and Lyra reflected on the journey they had taken to cultivate their inner calm. The wind whispered through the branches, and the sun cast long shadows on the ground, signaling the end of another day. "I used to believe that peace was something you could find outside of yourself," John said, his voice calm and steady. "I thought it was about controlling the world around me, making sure everything went according to my plans. But I've learned that true peace comes from within. It's about accepting the things I cannot change and focusing on how I respond to them." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "I used to seek peace in the idea of permanence," she replied. "I thought that if I could just hold on to the things I loved, if I could just keep everything the same, I would never have to face loss again. But I've learned that life is in constant flux, and the more I resist that change, the more I suffer." John smiled, grateful for the wisdom Lyra had shared. "It's a difficult lesson, but one worth learning. I've found that the more I focus on what I can control, my thoughts, my actions, my reactions, the more peaceful I feel. And when I face challenges, I don't see them as obstacles anymore. I see them as opportunities to practice patience and resilience." Lyra's eyes softened as she thought about the many challenges they had faced together. "And the more I accept the things I cannot control, the more I realize that I can find peace even amid chaos. Stoicism has taught me that the key to happiness is not in avoiding hardship, but in how we meet it." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of footsteps approaching. A traveler had arrived at the village, weary from his journey. He looked lost, uncertain of where to go or whom to speak to. John and Lyra exchanged a glance, both recognizing that this was an opportunity to practice what they had just discussed. They rose from their seats and approached the traveler with calm, steady steps. "Welcome," John said warmly. "You seem tired. Is there anything we can do to help you?" The traveler looked up, his face etched with worry. "I've been traveling for days and I'm not sure where I'm headed. I don't know what to do anymore." Lyra stepped forward, her voice gentle yet firm. "Sometimes when we're lost, it helps to pause and breathe. You cannot control the road ahead, but you can control how you respond to it. Take a moment to ground yourself and trust that you will find your way." The traveler paused, taking in their words. He seemed to relax slightly, as though the weight of his uncertainty had lightened just a little. "Thank you," he said quietly, feeling a sense of peace that he hadn't expected to find. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, John and Lyra returned to their seats beneath the oak tree. They knew that the lessons of Stoicism were not ones they would ever fully master, but they also knew that every day offered an opportunity to practice, grow, and cultivate inner calm. Life, they understood, was a series of challenges and changes. But in the quiet of their hearts, they had learned to accept the ebb and flow of it all, finding peace in the knowledge that their thoughts, their actions, and their responses were the only things they could truly control. And with that, they sat in silence, content in the stillness, knowing that this moment, like all moments, was both fleeting and eternal. In this expanded version, John and Lyra's story explores the journey of embracing Stoicism to find inner calm, drawing from their experiences with grief, loss, and adversity. They learn that peace is not external, but cultivated through understanding, acceptance, and the ability to control one's response to life's challenges. Lesson 11. Serve others selflessly. In a small windswept village nestled among towering hills and dense forests, two men, John and Lysander, lived quite differently, despite the shared path their lives had once taken. Their story was one of contrasts. One had chosen a life of material success, the other had sought a deeper, more profound purpose. Both, however, would soon come to realize that true fulfillment in life comes not from the pursuit of personal gain, but from serving others selflessly. John, once a bright and promising young man, had climbed the ranks of his community, earning respect and admiration from those around him. His name was known in every household, and his face was recognized by every villager. He had amassed a fortune, built a prosperous business, and lived in a grand house that overlooked the entire village. Yet despite all his accomplishments, John felt an emptiness within him that no amount of wealth or success could fill. The more he acquired, the more isolated he became. His relationships, once warm and genuine, had turned transactional, and he found himself surrounded by people who praised him not for who he truly was, but for what he had. On the other hand, Lysander had chosen a different path. Though born into a family of modest means, he had never cared much for wealth or recognition. Instead, he focused on something that transcended the fleeting pleasures of material life, the well-being of others. Lysander believed in the teachings of Stoicism, the ancient Greek philosophy that emphasized virtue, wisdom, and the importance of self-control. He understood that true peace came from within, from accepting the impermanence of life, and from living in harmony with nature and reason. Unlike John, Lysander had little interest in fame or fortune. His modest home was nestled at the edge of the village, far from the grandeur of the town center. He spent his days working as a healer, offering his services to anyone in need, regardless of their status or wealth. People often sought him out for his advice, not because he was rich, but because of the wisdom and kindness that emanated from him. Lysander was known for his selflessness, always willing to lend a hand to anyone who required assistance, be it a poor farmer struggling with illness or a grieving widow in need of comfort. Though their lives had taken divergent paths, John and Lysander crossed each other's way often. John admired Lysander from afar, seeing in him a serenity and peace that he could not understand. He was intrigued by Lysander's ability to face life's challenges with such calmness and grace, while he struggled to find contentment despite his material success. One fateful day, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, John approached Lysander. "Why do you live like this?" John asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and skepticism. "You could have everything: wealth, power, influence. Yet you choose to live in this humble way, serving others. Why not seek more for yourself?" Lysander, who had heard variations of this question many times before, smiled softly and responded, "John, you seek answers in the world outside, but true fulfillment is found within. It is not in wealth or status that we find our purpose, but in the ways we serve others. When we live for ourselves alone, we are prisoners of our desires, forever chasing something that can never truly satisfy. But when we live for others, we discover a deeper meaning in life, a meaning that transcends the fleeting pleasures of the material world." John, though initially skeptical, felt a stirring within him as he listened to Lysander's words. He had spent so much of his life chasing after wealth and power, but it had never brought him the peace he longed for. The emptiness remained no matter how many accolades or possessions he accumulated. At that moment, he began to question the choices he had made. "How do you know this?" John asked, his voice quiet. "How can you be so sure?" Lysander's gaze softened and he replied, "I know because I have lived it." Stoicism teaches us that life is not about what we gain, but but about how we respond to what life gives us. By focusing on virtue, wisdom, and serving others, we free ourselves from the chains of our desires. I have found peace not in what I possess, but in what I can give. John, moved by the simplicity and truth of Lysander's words, felt a shift in his perspective. He had spent so much time focusing on what he could take from the world that he had never truly considered what he could give. He began to wonder if perhaps he had been chasing the wrong things all along. Over the next few months, John sought to live differently. He scaled back his business ventures, choosing instead to dedicate his time and energy to helping those in need. He used his resources to fund projects that would benefit the village, from building schools for the children to providing food for the hungry. At first, the villagers were skeptical of his motives, but over time, they saw a change in him. No longer did he carry the air of a man seeking recognition. Instead, he worked alongside them, offering his help without expectation of anything in return. Lysander, too, continued his work as a healer, offering his wisdom and compassion to anyone who came his way. His days were filled with quiet service, and though he asked for nothing in return, he found deep satisfaction in knowing that he was making a difference in the lives of those around him. He was content, not because of the wealth he had amassed or the fame he had gained, but because he had found true meaning in selflessly serving others. One day, John sat with Lysander on a hill overlooking the village. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the land, and the two men sat in silence, reflecting on the journey they had both taken. "I have learned something, Lysander," John said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You were right. All these years, I thought that success was measured by what I could accumulate and by how much I could achieve. But now I see that the true measure of a person's worth is in how they serve others. I feel more fulfilled now, despite having less than I did before. It's as if the more I give, the more I receive." Lysander nodded, a gentle smile on his face. The Stoics believe that true happiness comes not from external circumstances, but from our inner peace and virtue. By serving others selflessly, we align ourselves with the natural order of the world. We are all part of something greater, and our purpose is to contribute to the well-being of the whole. John looked out over the village, his heart full. "I see now that success is not about what we take from the world, but what we give to it. Thank you for showing me this, Lysander. You have changed my life." Lysander chuckled softly. "No, John, you changed your own life. I simply showed you the way." And so, both men found peace. One through the wisdom of the Stoics, the other through the simple act of serving others. They learned that true fulfillment was not in the pursuit of personal gain, but in the selfless service of those around them. The more they gave, the more they received. And in the end, they discovered that serving others is the truest path to inner peace and lasting joy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the last light of the day across the village, the two men knew that their lives had been transformed forever. They had learned, in the most profound way, that to live a life of purpose is to live for others, without expectation, without reward, and with an open heart. And in doing so, they had found the greatest gift of all, a life well lived. Lesson 12. Accept impermanence. The story of John and his journey to understanding Stoicism and impermanence. In a small village tucked between towering mountains and serene rivers, there lived a man named John. He was not particularly rich, nor did he possess an abundance of material possessions. Yet he was known for his calm demeanor and his ability to handle adversity with grace. Many in the village would come to him for advice, seeking to understand the source of his peace. What they did not know was that John had spent many years struggling with deep turmoil, both within himself and in the world around him. Years ago, John had been like anyone else, caught up in the pursuit of success and the desire to cling to things he thought he needed to feel secure. He believed that happiness came from external accomplishments, a bigger house, a better reputation, and more wealth. But no matter how much he accumulated, it always felt as if something was missing, as though the very nature of life itself eluded him. And so he continued to strive, pushing forward, always chasing a goal that seemed just beyond reach. It wasn't until one fateful night that John's perspective began to shift. he had received devastating news. His closest friend, Alaron, had passed away suddenly in an accident. This tragedy shook John to his core. Alaron had been his companion through many years, someone who understood him better than anyone else. The loss was immense, and John found himself engulfed in grief and confusion. He realized in that moment how fragile life truly was. No matter how much we tried to control it, everything could be taken away in the blink of an eye. In his sorrow, John sought refuge in the writings of ancient philosophers. He pored over the teachings of the Stoics, figures like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, whose words resonated deeply with him. They spoke of the transience of life, the inevitability of change, and the importance of accepting things as they were, rather than yearning for how they might have been or could be. The Stoics taught that to live virtuously, one must learn to embrace impermanence. To hold on to anything too tightly, they said, was to invite suffering. John spent many nights contemplating these ideas, allowing them to sink into his soul. Slowly but surely, he began to change. He no longer tried to control the uncontrollable, nor did he fear loss. He understood that life, with all its joys and sorrows, was a fleeting moment in time. The things we accumulate, whether possessions, relationships, or achievements, are all impermanent, and yet they are what make life beautiful. It was not the things themselves, but the experiences they created, the lessons they taught, and the connections they fostered that held meaning. One morning, as John sat by the riverbank, the cool breeze rustling the leaves of the trees above him, he realized that his grief had transformed into a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the time he had shared with Alaron, for the memories they had created, and for the lesson that death had imparted, that nothing lasts forever, and therefore every moment must be cherished. John's heart swelled with acceptance, and he felt at peace. As he walked back to the village, he noticed the changes in the landscape. The flowers were in bloom, the sun was shining, and the sound of children laughing filled the air. Everything was constantly changing, and that was okay. There was beauty in the ebb and flow of life, in the rise and fall of the seasons, in the birth and death of each moment. John had come to understand that life's impermanence was not something to fear, but rather something to embrace. In the months that followed, John's newfound wisdom began to spread throughout the village. People would come to him with their struggles, and he would share the teachings of the Stoics, encouraging them to find peace by accepting impermanence. He spoke of how we are all like the river, flowing and changing, always moving toward an unknown future. He reminded them that no one is immune to loss, but that by accepting it, we can free ourselves from the anxiety that comes with trying to hold on to what is fleeting. Through John's teachings, the village began to shift. People learned to let go of their attachments, to find peace in the present moment, and to cherish the time they had with one another. They no longer feared the future or regretted the past. Instead, they embraced the present with open hearts, understanding that every moment was a gift, no matter how transient it may be. One day, a young man named Eris approached John with a question that had been weighing on his mind. "Master John," he said, "I have heard your teachings and find them wise, but I still cannot understand how I can be at peace with the fact that everything I love will one day be gone. How can I find peace in that?" John smiled and placed a hand on Eris's shoulder. "Eris, the answer is not in trying to avoid loss, but in accepting it as part of life's cycle. To love something deeply is to understand that it is a gift, and every gift is temporary. The beauty of life lies not in permanence, but in the fleeting moments we share. When we accept that, we can truly experience life in all its richness." Eris nodded, but there was still a trace of doubt in his eyes. "But how can I be sure I am not just resigning myself to suffering?" John's eyes softened. The Stoics did not advocate for resignation. They taught us to approach life with strength and resilience. By accepting impermanence, we free ourselves from the burden of constant worry. We are not giving up, we are becoming more fully alive and more present in each moment. This is the path to peace. As Eris walked away, his heart lighter than before, John returned to his thoughts. He knew that his journey was far from over. Life was a constant flow, ever changing, ever evolving. There would be more lessons to learn and more challenges to face. But he had learned to trust in the process, to accept impermanence, and to find peace within the ever-changing nature of existence. In time, John's teachings would continue to inspire generations to come. His legacy was not one of material wealth or grand accomplishments, but of wisdom and understanding. He had learned to live with grace, to embrace the present, and to find peace in the impermanence of life. And in doing so, he had found the deepest form of contentment. A contentment that did not depend on the world around him, but on the acceptance of life as it was, in all its beauty and transience. And so John's story became a reminder for all who heard it, to live not for the things we can hold on to, but for the moments we can experience, the connections we can make, and the acceptance of life as it is, a journey, fleeting and beautiful, full of change and growth. Final thoughts: the path to Stoic confidence. In a quiet town nestled between hills, far away from the bustling world, there lived two young men, John and Zephyros. Both were from different walks of life, yet they shared a common longing, a desire to find meaning in a world that seemed unpredictable and chaotic. John was a man of reason, his mind always at work, constantly calculating and observing. He spent his days in the village library, poring over books of philosophy, literature, and history. Though his life was filled with knowledge, it often felt empty to him. Despite his logical mind, John struggled to understand why the world acted in such irrational ways. Emotions, unpredictability, and suffering were things he couldn't easily control. His thoughts often wandered to the great philosophers of the past, wondering if there was a way to find peace amid such turmoil. He had heard of Stoicism before, but had never fully embraced its teachings. Zephyros, on the other hand, was a man of action. A former soldier, his life had been shaped by conflict and discipline. While he had once been consumed by pride and ambition, those feelings had slowly been replaced by a growing sense of serenity. He had learned to withstand hardship with a calm heart, recognizing that many things in life were outside of his control. He embraced the core principles of Stoicism, understanding the difference between what was within his power and what was not. Yet, despite his personal growth, he often found himself questioning if his acceptance of fate had truly led to wisdom. The two men's paths crossed one chilly evening as they both arrived at the village's only tavern, seeking shelter from the biting wind. At first, their conversation was simple, a discussion of the weather, the state of the harvest, and other mundane topics. But as the evening wore on, their talk turned deeper, and their minds began to open to ideas that had once seemed distant. "Tell me, John," Zephyros began, his voice calm yet curious. "Do you ever wonder why people suffer so much? I used to think it was fate, but now I think it has something to do with our response to what happens to us." John looked at him thoughtfully, his brow furrowed. "Suffering is something I've tried to understand for a long time. I think it's a result of chaos, things that are beyond our control. But how can we ever find peace when so much is beyond us?" Zephyros smiled gently. "That's the core of Stoicism, isn't it? Understanding what is within our power and what is not. For example, we can't control the actions of others, the weather, or the inevitable changes that life throws our way. But we can control how we respond to these things." John nodded slowly, his mind churning over these words. "So you're saying that the key to peace is acceptance? That no matter what happens, if we accept it, we can find tranquility?" "Exactly," Zephyros replied. "Acceptance doesn't mean passivity. It means recognizing the limits of our control and then focusing our energy on those things we can change, like our own thoughts, actions, and attitudes. When we align ourselves with nature and reason, we start to see that what truly matters is how we approach life, not what life throws at us." The conversation went on deep into the night, with John and Zephyros discussing the Stoic virtues, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. They both found themselves intrigued by the idea that true confidence came not from external achievements or possessions, but from inner peace and understanding. Over the following months, John began to incorporate Stoic teachings into his own life. He learned to focus less on external outcomes and more on his reactions to the events that occurred around him. He started practicing mindfulness and reflection, examining his thoughts and actions in light of Stoic wisdom. Slowly but surely, he began to notice changes in himself. He became more patient, more resilient, and more confident, not in the sense of boasting or arrogance, but in the quiet strength that came from knowing he had control over his mind and actions. Zephyros, too, continued to evolve. While he had already embraced many of the Stoic ideals, he realized that there was always more to learn and more ways to grow. He found a renewed commitment to practicing kindness, acting justly, and living by nature. He saw that true Stoic confidence wasn't about achieving a perfect state of serenity, but about constantly striving to become a better version of oneself, no matter the circumstances. One day, months after their first conversation, the two men met again at the same tavern. This time, the conversation was not so much about philosophy, but about life itself, how their understanding of Stoicism had shaped their perspectives and actions. "Zephyros," John said with a contented smile, "I think I understand now. Stoicism isn't just about enduring hardship or accepting fate. It's about becoming the best version of ourselves, no matter what happens in life. It's about aligning ourselves with reason and virtue." Zephyros looked at him thoughtfully. "Yes, and it's about recognizing that the true path to confidence lies within. It's not in what we achieve, but in how we respond to the world around us." As the evening drew to a close, John and Zephyros stood together, feeling a sense of peace that they hadn't known before. They understood now that Stoicism was not a destination, but a lifelong journey, a path that would guide them through life's inevitable challenges with grace, wisdom, and strength. In the stillness of the night, they realized that true confidence was not about conquering the world, but about mastering themselves. And so, with their hearts light and their minds clear, John and Zephyros set forth on their respective paths. Two men, bound not by fate or circumstance, but by a shared understanding that peace and confidence came not from the outside world, but from within.